welcome to the inaugural episode of my podcast, the flagship episode, the pilot, if you will. I couldn't be more excited to be coming to you live from the great state of Arkansas. You know, I've done a lot of media, obviously ran for office. I've been out there in the public sphere, but there's only so much you can say. You're obviously time limited, you're subject limited when you're on someone else's platform. I'm going to continue to get out there into the larger media platforms, but I really wanted to create my own content, create my own space where, you know, at some frequency, I'm thinking once a week at this point. It's not going to be every single day, news of the day commentary, but I wanted to create my own environment where I could get my long form ideas out there on a wide variety of subjects. I mean, this podcast, it's not just going to be news of the day. It's not just going to be politics. It's going to be sports. It's going to be history. It's going to be military issues. It's going to be entertainment. It's going to be things happening from a Christian worldview perspective. We're going to talk about strength training. Yes, you need to be lifting weights. You need to be getting stronger. You need to be putting on mass. We'll get to all that. But that's, you know, this podcast, it's new and it's exciting. We don't have to understand exactly what it is right now, what it's going to be in a month, 3 months, 6 months, or a year from now. We're just going to start. Sometimes you just have to embark upon the journey, burn the boats, and see what happens. But I think it's going to be great. I think eventually we're going to have some very exciting guests for y'all on this show. As this thing develops, I think it's going to be very exciting and a lot of fun. Really, at the bottom line, though, what I want this podcast to be, I want it to be an exhortation. I want it to give the listener permission to think, to say out loud, to live out loud the beliefs that we all know to be true. Okay, you know, the left, the opposition, our opposition, they have a lot of weapons at their disposal. They have every arm of the propaganda machine, the mainstream media, legacy corporate media, every institution. You know, we all know how bad the situation is in our culture, and those weapons are formidable. But we have God on our side. We have tradition on our side. We have human nature on our side. And those things, you know, ultimately, you know, I like to say this, and I saw the great Pedro Gonzalez mentioned this in a recent article quoting Francisco Franco, the Spanish general from the early 20th century. He held himself accountable only to God and to history. And I would throw family in there as well. But, you know, no matter what the world is throwing at us today, if we are staying accountable to those things, not just the whims of the day, the contemporary ideas, just the hot air that floats around in so many media outlets, you know, even conservative media outlets, you know, we're gonna try to stay away from that. Obviously we're gonna bob and weave into some of the issues of the day. But I want this to be an exhortation to the listener to speak the truth and to live the truth fearlessly, because that's what we need. You know, we have a lot of people who, you know, don't have a lot of courage and conviction these days, and it's not easy. I mean, it's really the great battle of our time. It's, you know, we're living in a world where everyone is telling us that the sky is green. You know, we can look at the sky, we see that it's blue, but we're being commanded to say that it's green. And that's really what power is. I sent a tweet out about that the other day. You know, there was this media clip of these guys talking about some guy who had transitioned, and they were out there conducting this interview, and they were saying to themselves back and forth, she was using the bathroom because she transitioned, and it was a sky is green moment. Really what it is, it's an opportunity for the left to exert their power and authority over people. We'll get deeper into that. But really, I mean, I want to set the table and just kind of give you my perspective on what I see in politics and in the culture right now. You know, there's this the old right view versus the new right view of things. I think our party, I guess people on the right, I'm going to use these terms somewhat interchangeably, but I really do believe that there's quite a bit of tension in our movement right now. There's a big fracture because you have people who are still going about their business through the old way of doing things, despite the fact that those methods have proven to be a complete and utter failure. You have a lot of people in conservative politics and conservative media who think that we're still living in the 1950s or 1960s in the way that we approach our opposition. They think that we can, eventually we're just going to checkmate the left with our brilliant intellect. That we are, we're going to debate them to death. That we're going to stand up there and just, like some people who go to these college campuses and talk to people, during these Q&A sessions, they're going to be stunned by, wow, I really had never thought of that, and wow, you're really brilliant, and oh my goodness, I've been totally convinced, and let me come up on stage and we can hug it out, and now I'm a newly baptized convert to the Republican Party, and now I'm going to go vote Republican, and we're all just going to sing Kumbaya and everything's going to be okay. Well, that clearly, I mean, I'm saying that kind of as a joke, but like we've all seen that's the way people think it's going to go. They think that we're the left is eventually they're going to come across by some kind of accident, they're going to come across the correct information, and then everything's just going to go back to the 1950s, and we're going to have this Andy Griffith show, Leave It to Beaver America again. But of course, that's not the way it works. And how do I know that this is not the way it works? How do I know this way of thinking is not going to be successful? Because it hasn't been successful. Okay, everything in the conservative movement, quote unquote, has been a failure since it was started. Okay, I'm 34 years old. I don't want to be sitting here talking about these same problems when I'm 74 years old and hoping that Red Wave 2064 is going to save us. Red Wave 2064 with the slogan, "This time it's different." Like I'm not going to do that. I'd rather be dead. I would rather be dead than to be sitting here doing this in 40 years as the left slowly, incrementally crushes us on issue after issue after issue. I mean, how do I know that we're failing? Okay, because look, it starts with how you define victory. Okay, the left defines victory in actually moving the needle on policy outcomes. Okay, that's how they define victory. That's the proper way to define victory. The right defines victory in terms of just winning elections. Politics is not like elections. It's not just an end unto itself. That's the other thing that's kind of confusing. Well, it's not really confusing. It's more sinister when you really think about it, and you think about the incentive structure that is built up around politics in America right now. We'll get to that. But a lot of folks on the right, kind of the old right, they seem to think that politics is an end unto itself, like winning, we win back the House with this, like razor thin majority. And then, maybe we'll win back the Senate. But of course, like 90%, the Senate, it's not 50-50. It's really 90-10, left versus right. And then, like maybe we'll win the White House, even though we haven't won the popular vote since 2004. But even if we win the White House, clearly as we've, as things have progressed through Bush and now through Trump, like there's, even with, a Republican in the White House, it's almost impossible to reverse the damage or even really slow it down. And just one example I always quote on this, I mean, people don't understand this. Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they ran on traditional marriage in 2008. People can't believe that. You can look up clips. They said, hey, Senator Obama, Senator Biden, you guys, what do y'all think about the gay rights movement, blah, blah, blah. And say, oh, well, marriage is between one man and one woman. Even though they clearly didn't believe that, or they weren't willing to fight for it at all. They still campaigned. It was still necessary for them to win in America in 2008 as traditional marriage, one man, one woman Democrats. Okay, now that's that's like too far right for most Republicans to say out loud. Okay, like that right there illustrates the difference between winning elections and actually winning on policy where the rubber meets the road. And, that's, you'll stop being disappointed in the GOP when you really understand what it is. And, I can say this as someone who ran as a Republican. In the two-party system, you really have to choose one or the other these days. But really the Republican Party, I saw, Lindsey Graham was in this, he was giving some kind of an interview last week where he was talking about Ukraine and, how, and of course, McConnell was saying this is the most important thing happening in the world right now, while, dozens of trains are being derailed, people in Ohio are getting, acid rain dropped onto them. This frontier war on the murky borders of a exploited colony in Eastern Europe, that's the most important thing happening in the world right now. But really, you stop getting upset about things like that coming from Republicans when you really understand what the GOP is. The Republican Party is not a political movement. If it were a political movement, it would be the worst, most spectacularly failed political movement in the history of the world. Okay, it's not a political movement. What it is, it's three things. One, it is a defeat mechanism against the right. I say the right, red-blooded American patriots, people who probably are going to be the majority of this audience. The people who, at least half the country, at least 40% of the country, people on the right. The GOP exists to stop us, to stop people like that. And if you don't believe me, just look at the structure of the party. I mean, yeah, there's a small and somewhat growing group of true believers in the House, but really it's almost impossible to win a U.S. Senate race as a true hard right, a true member of the right, running as a Republican, and that's really exemplified in the debate over who the next Speaker of the House was going to be back in January, and more on that later in this episode. But really, I like to illustrate the Republican Party is a defeat mechanism against the right, because really the GOP is analogous to the Washington Generals. If any of you ever saw the Harlem Globetrotters play, I saw them when I was growing up play here in Central Arkansas. And the Globetrotters, they don't play against, they don't scrimmage against themselves. There's a team that travels with them that's their controlled opposition. They're called the Washington Generals. And the Washington Generals are professional losers. They put up a good fight. Most of the games are close. If you're in the audience at a Globetrotters game, you'll think the Generals might win at some point. They score buckets, they hit threes. But in the end, the Generals always find a way to lose. And, in the locker room after the game, they're drinking beer and, opening up paychecks signed by the same bosses. That is the GOP, the Washington Generals. They exist as a pressure release valve for the right, so that we keep channeling our money, time, effort, and political energy, political capital, into this pressure release valve, the GOP, so nothing ever really gets done. I mean, if the GOP didn't exist, the system would have a real problem, because people would know beyond the shadow of a doubt, hey, we have no representation in D.C. But that's really the genius, the insidious genius of the GOP, is that it exists to give the pretense of a fight against the left. I always say about the American Revolution, the greatest mistake the British made in the 1770s before the Revolutionary War. The Americans, in the First Continental Congress and some of the olive branch petitions they sent to Parliament, really what they wanted, their rallying cry, one of them was no taxation without representation. They were very upset they had no representation in the British Parliament. The biggest mistake the Brits made in the mid-1770s when dealing with the Americans, they should have just given them a few seats in Parliament. Yeah, like, it wouldn't have made any difference. I mean, they wouldn't have been a body inside the Congress or inside Parliament that would have had any power, but it would have given them the fake pretense that they were being represented. They had a voice that was being heard. It could have avoided the war or at least postponed it, but they were stupid and didn't do that. Our elites in politics in America today, they're smarter. They know that it's better to give your opposition the right fake representation. So they channel all their energy. You can just hear the colonists in Philadelphia. We're going to have an American colonial wave in 1778. And the British are finally going to take off these taxes against the colonies. And, who knows? We could still be having those debates if the British were smart enough to do that to the American colonists, but they weren't. And, we can get more into some historical analogies at a later time. But that's really the first thing that GOP is. It's a defeat mechanism against the right. The second thing it's a protection racket for incumbents. I mean, take it from me. I challenged an incumbent in a U.S. Senate primary here in Arkansas last year. And, it's like the mafia. You watch Goodfellas, you watch The Godfather. I mean, one of the things the mafia did, it was a protection racket. You pay us money, and we will protect you against your opposition. But there was as with the mafia, there's an implicit threat inside that protection racket. If you don't toe the party line, if you don't do what we say, then we might fund your potential opposition. We might take our interests elsewhere. So that's why a lot of members of the Republican Party, most of them, they spend a lot of their time, a lot of their working hours in D.C., raising money, not just for themselves, but for the party apparatus, because they know that if they get crossways with the party apparatus and they're in the wrong district, and the apparatus is able to find a primary challenger, then with the right amount of money and enough lies out there, and with an uninformed electorate, it's game over. And of course, I can give you a lot more anecdotes about my experience, in taking on an incumbent. But so you have the three aspects of the GOP. You have a defeat mechanism against the right, the Washington Generals. You have a protection racket against incumbents, and really the third part of our movement, our kind of like phony, GOP movement. It's entertainment. That's kind of a sad thing, about the state of play in our country right now is that. A lot of people, as far as their interest in politics goes, it's really more about entertainment. And I'm guilty of this as well. I mean, we listen to podcasts while we're driving to work or listening or, working out in the gym or just, around the office, around the house at night, during, quiet moments of the day or night. It's just, it's some people who watch, conservative leaning networks on TV. It's really more about, hey, I'm upset about things generally. I want to see someone or listen to someone who has my views get riled up about it. But it really doesn't, at the end of the day, unlike the left, it really doesn't make a difference on the ground. It really doesn't make a difference in terms of, moving the needle. And, people might get upset about that, but really you can't argue with the results or lack thereof. And so that's really my big argument with the system is that it's not that we need to just elect more Republicans. It's that the system itself is designed to crush us. The system itself is designed to thwart our ideas, to move the nation to the left. That's what the system is. And if you want proof about that, it's not just about more Republicans. I'm from Arkansas. I live here in Arkansas. We have GOP supermajorities in both houses of our state legislature. Like Democrats are extinct in this state. In states like Wyoming, it's even more pronounced. I mean, I think the state of Wyoming has like 3 Democrats in their entire legislature. But these deep red states, they can't really move the needle on the ground because of the power of the federal government, the power of the bureaucracy, the power of the federal court system, the power of the media. And then, of course, you just have people in those GOP seats who aren't true believers. They're just happy to be there. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are in politics these days, they're just, they're dodgeball targets. There are people who've been stuffed in lockers their entire lives. I mean, we're not really sending our best, to represent us in politics. I mean, and it's really kind of like a B-level celebrity. I mean, back in the day, I mean, in the old republic, right back when America really was a constitutional republic, a true federation of states. I would say in the first founding of our country from 1776, or really 1789 through 1865, the first founding of the country. Like the best and brightest in a culture, in a society, in a community, they had an obligation, kind of a noblesse oblige, to serve in politics, to represent their fellow man, to be involved. I mean, that really was the kind of, if you can keep it, Benjamin Franklin, idea of what a republic is and what a republic is supposed to be. You have the wealthy, the informed, the intelligent, the people who have this, they feel this obligation to serve. But really, we don't have that anymore. And for a variety of reasons, you could probably do a whole entire podcast series on this. But really, there's a lot of downside and not too much upside to running for elected office and serving in elected office. If you are a high status, wealthy, quote unquote elite person. The flip side of that is there is tremendous upside if you are this dodgeball target, guy getting a swirly stuffed in a locker nerd. Then the upside is huge. If you're serving in a state legislature, or even better, serving in Congress, I mean, this is like the pinnacle of your entire existence, right? I mean, you go from being a zero to a hero almost overnight. I mean, you're making more money than probably you would ever make in the private sector. You have people coming to come ask you for things. When you walk into the U.S. Capitol, security opens the door for you. You've got your PIN. Constituents know who you are. But then again, that's the insidious nature of it. Is these people are terrified that it can be all taken away. When you're at the pinnacle of your existence, you'll do anything to stay there, and they will. I mean, the system actively, goes down and recruits people like this to run for office, because they know once they get their hooks in them and they get a little bit of taste of the good life, of real or imagined power, esteem, prestige, then they'll do anything to stay there. And that's support the party apparatus. That's do what certain donors or lobbyists might want to get done, and not necessarily what's in the interest of your constituents, the people who sent you there, or what's in the interest of the country as a whole, or honoring or God or tradition, as we said earlier. So that's what politics is today, and that's why I was so intrigued and frankly pretty excited to see the debate on national divorce break somewhat into the mainstream this week. Marjorie Taylor Greene put the tweet out, calling for national divorce. This has been something that is circulated somewhat in right-leaning circles, especially on social media. I've seen it. I'm excited about this discourse taking place, because at least it needs to be talked about by people who are in elected office. We need to start changing the conversation from, elect more Republicans and, things are going to get better. That failed paradigm, as we explained earlier, to, okay, the system is designed for us to fail. We've got to actually start talking about changing the system. Okay, it's what I said in the opening. I'm 34 years old. I'm not going to spend 40 years talking about electing more Republicans into this failed federal government, this tyrannical federal government that is bent on crushing me, and expecting a different result. We're not going to do it. So we're talking about national divorce and what that actually looks like. Well, it's not going to be as simple as just saying, hey, we want, to go our separate ways. We, what do they say in divorce parlance? Irreconcilable differences. We certainly have those. We're living in at least 3 or 4 separate countries today. I mean, I always marvel at the simple stat that there are more people, or there are about the same number of people, maybe more, in the state of Arkansas today, about 3 million, than there were at the founding of the country in 1776. Okay, so that just kind of gives you some kind of perspective about what the country was. The entire 13 colonies had less population, had fewer people than one very small state, Arkansas, does today. It's out of control. I mean, like we live in two different realities. One, we're looking at the same sky, one saying the sky is blue, one saying the sky is green on dozens of different issues, and we still try to make it work like that. Like there's some, we can't even agree on what a woman is, and somehow we expect to resolve those differences peacefully and politically. That's just, as Bill Belichick would say, that's just not a very good job of managing expectations. So in terms of national divorce, in certain respects, it's been tried before. If you read about the Civil War, especially before the brainwashed and censored history of the mid 20th century and beyond, if you read contemporary written sources about what the secessionists really believed, they thought that they were voiding a legal document. They thought they were going about a process that the states had agreed to, that, in 1789 through 91, as the Constitution was being ratified by the new country, they thought that, hey, if a state at any point decided that, this union isn't working out for me, then we can formally vote to secede, and it would be a legal proceeding. That was very foolish. The South didn't understand the nature of, some of the radical abolitionists and people in the North. They were pretty poorly led. There were some talented military leaders in the Confederacy, but the politicians of the Confederacy were very poor in most cases. Just very poor administration. It wasn't very well thought out. They thought they could just walk away, and it's really interesting to see that that same mindset still permeate through this national divorce conversation. Oh, we can just walk away. Well, that's not how it works, because the left, it's not just let's just go our separate ways. We'll go over here, saying that men are men and women are women, and we'll go over here saying that you can have 27 different gender identities. Like, no, the left, they get off on rubbing our faces in it. That's the whole point. I mean, just look at the Pride movement itself. It started out as like, oh, you can't tell someone what to do in their bedroom. And now it's, bake the cake bigot, or go to prison, fly the rainbow flag, or go to prison, do this and that, pledge allegiance to the ideology, or your life is ruined and your kids are taken away, or you're dead. That's, like that's how these things progress. And somehow we think it's going to be, we're going to be able to walk away from that and just, have our own, quasi-independent, nation or loose affiliation of states. I just don't think people are intellectually or emotionally prepared for the kind of battle that it would take to do that, because the left is, they're just, it's a religion to them. Okay. And trying to get away from that is an affront to their lower G God. It's an affront to their religion. And they will stop at nothing to kill or convert the non-believers. So I just, I am grateful that, kudos to MTG. I mean, she got Sean Hannity talking about it on his show the other night. So it is somewhat breaking out into the mainstream discourse. But it's, I am encouraged that people are at least starting to say out loud these things that are so important, because, I'm open to a lot of things. I'm open to being attacked, for not being right tactically, or, hey, we've got to do this and this and this to achieve our ends. I'm open to those discussions. The discussion I'm not open to is, let's just keep doing the same thing over again. Let's try to elect more Republicans, better Republicans, and somehow this tyrannical federal government that, wants to, force you to wear a diaper over your face and, inject you with experimental medical treatments and steal half your income every single year. We're going to somehow reform this system. It's just not going to work like that. And, it's, I'm always there's a great book on this subject and many others, just kind of about the new right, that I recommend to anyone. Christopher Caldwell, The Age of Entitlement. It really goes into detail about a whole range of issues, about how the left really conquered the culture, and thinking about Wyoming. I was talking about the makeup of their state legislature, and I was I loved the memes that were coming out last week on social media about Yellowstone. You had these memes where you have John Dutton, the protagonist of Yellowstone. He's sitting there on his truck, and he's talking about the thought bubbles that come up, and someone on the right had the idea to just put out these leftist talking points with the right-leaning visual aesthetic of the cowboy in Yellowstone. I don't really watch Yellowstone. I'm very proud to actually say that I sniffed this out from the very beginning. I mean, I saw the first couple episodes of the series. Everyone's like falling in love with it, and I'm not a hater. I mean, I think it is kind of cool that that this aesthetic is popular, and I love the Mountain West. I've spent a lot of time up there throughout my entire life. I've got family in Wyoming. I'm not anti-Wyoming. I'm not anti-Montana, or the Mountain West or the Rockies. I'm not anti the trad lifestyle. What I am attuned to, however, is just how ingenious and how insidious the left is. They use the right-wing aesthetic as a Trojan horse to sneak in their left-wing talking points, and Yellowstone's a great example. Most of the show, it's just weird. Like, you've got this character, the Monica, the Indian, the Indian wife of one of the Dutton sons. There's whole scenes in there when she's going on these rants about the white man, and our land was stolen, and there's this scene where it's kind of like a Pretty Woman situation where she's accused of shoplifting by the evil white store owner because she's Native American, of course. And wait a minute, like, why is this in the show? Well, I'll tell you why it's in the show. It's in the show because they want the right-leaning audience who is attracted to shows like Yellowstone to just kind of absorb, like, by osmosis, this very insidious kind of subconscious propaganda. And the left is so talented at this. They've been doing it for decades. And it's all throughout the Yellowstone series. I mean, you've got these, John Dutton, this tough guy, Kevin Costner, who, by the way, is in real life is a big Liz Cheney fan. Like, he wouldn't be part of some kind of like right-wing, TV show, like it's, he's a liberal in real life. So he's not going to do something. It's a religion. He's not going to do something that's against his religion. So that should be a pretty good tell in and of itself. But, you've got, he's dating an environmentalist at one point. And the environmentalist is like, this is, I do this for the environment. And Dutton's like, well, actually, I'm the real environmentalist. I believe in climate change more than you. It's kind of like the Democrats are the real racists talking point that a lot of Republicans like to trot out. And, in one episode, someone sent me a clip, like in season 1, episode 9, Rip, who's this tough guy. A lot of guys, like to dress up as Rip for Halloween, blah, blah, blah. And, he says to his... like his love interest is one of John Dutton's daughters. She's like this Marilyn Monroe, like, basket case, alcoholic and everything. And, he's just like, I don't care who you fuck. I care about you. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, like, this right-wing show. Everyone's like, oh, Yellowstone is badass. And, I just, there are some cool scenes in there. I love the visuals of Montana, if that's where it's filmed. I'm pretty sure it is. But, it's just, I've got a pretty good radar for sniffing out this Trojan horse, leftist propaganda with the right-wing aesthetic. And, don't tell me that Hollywood can't do it the opposite way, because, everyone who listens to this podcast, you should look up John Milius and watch every single piece of entertainment that guy ever wrote or produced or directed. The guy's an absolute genius. His daughter Amanda is very conservative. She served in the Trump administration. And John Milius, I mean, he was an absolute genius. His credits are pretty unbelievable. I mean, he was a writer on Apocalypse Now. He was a writer on Jaws. He wrote and directed Conan the Barbarian, one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's breakthrough movies. And he was this kind of like subversive, right-wing figure in Hollywood. who's just amazingly talented. I think one of the most amazing things he created was Rome, this HBO miniseries. If you haven't, go buy season 1, watch Rome. It's about the Roman civil wars, Julius Caesar, kind of the rise and fall of Caesar, as he fights and defeats Pompey with Mark Antony. There's a Cleopatra narrative, and then obviously his murder by Brutus and the senators. But it's just an amazingly well done miniseries. And of course, since John Milius, this guy who's not some left-wing moron, he actually has an understanding of history. He's actually going to portray the Roman Civil War in a historically accurate way that also happens to be badass. You've got to watch it. Watch season 1 of Rome if you want to. If you're looking for a new show. It even won some Emmys before Hollywood went crazy, because that's what happened. John Milius, eventually Hollywood figured out he was too good at his job, and they blackballed him. He really stopped getting major director gigs for feature movies after Red Dawn. He was the writer director of Red Dawn. The original Patrick Swayze Red Dawn. Where you have a band of teenagers, fighting the communists. It is an explicitly, pro-American, anti-communist, it is an explicitly right-wing plot. It is an explicitly right-wing movie. And of course, Hollywood they'd had enough of it. So, I don't want to hear that it can't be done. Some of the arguments, the debates I have with some of my friends about Yellowstone is, hey, they have to do this. This is how you get shows on TV. I'm just not buying that. And I think it's more insidious than that. And I think that, people on the right should have, their radar attuned at all times to sniff this stuff out, before we all get brainwashed. And that's why I was so pumped to see the Yellowstone memes get some traction. And you see the same thing. There's this new HBO show out, The Last of Us. I haven't watched any of it, but I saw, you've got the Ron Swanson character. There's an entire episode devoted to this guy's gay love story in the middle of this zombie apocalypse. Like an entire 60-minute episode on HBO is dedicated to this complete sidebar irrelevant story about this guy falling in love with another man during the zombie apocalypse. And of course, it's the right-wing aesthetic. I mean, the guy who plays Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, he's this survivalist, he's this tough guy. It's the same thing as Yellowstone. They're trying to Trojan horse in these left-wing ideologies through the right-wing aesthetic. Okay, they're very smart about this. And, we should fight fire with fire. We should, if you can't, for all the young John Milius types out there who are in entertainment and media, I mean, yeah, we should be looking to cultivate our own parallel systems, but we should also be looking to, subversively insert right-wing ideology into, supposedly left-wing narratives. So, I'm not, totally sold that, it's impossible, that Hollywood's been totally captured. It largely has, but there are talented people who are young and who believe what we believe. I know it for a fact. I know people out in Los Angeles who are in the entertainment industry, who are, people who listen to War Room and consume the same kind of media that we consume. So they're out there, they just have to be encouraged and, hopefully through platforms like this, exhorted, to fight back asymmetrically. And, there was another thing that, I was thinking about when it comes to, I mentioned earlier this battle over who was going to be Speaker of the House. That was a really, really amazing display of where we are in American politics. And, I'm not going to bore everyone with the background. This was early last month. But, a very narrow majority was elected in the House of Representatives, which ironically, of course, this is just kind of making my point. It was better than a red wave for the right, because there was such a slim majority, only 5 or 6 seat majority of Republicans, that the truly hardcore people inside the GOP caucus had all kinds of leverage, and they decided to exercise that leverage over, who they wanted to be Speaker of the House. There were 20 holdouts originally, who wanted to, extract a lot of these concessions from House leadership before they agreed to, the votes before they gave the votes to make Kevin McCarthy Speaker. And, during this whole kerfuffle, this was when the whole George Santos thing was kind of popping off. And, I said that I thought George Santos should be Speaker of the House. I mean, that's if I was a member of the House at the time, maybe at least for just one of the initial votes that were kind of irrelevant, I would have nominated George Santos. And, people they were caught off guard by that. But I wanted to kind of explain at a little more length what I meant by that, because George Santos, he's not some kind of outlier in Congress. He might be an extreme case, but he's really more of the rule, not the exception. I mean, most people in Congress got in there, through some type of subversion, just like some kind of crazy embellishment of their history, their background. They're these kind of low status types who, politics is really all they've got. And so they run for office, and, really they've got nothing to lose. And George Santos, I mean, I'm not going to go into all the things that, he's accused of making up, but he's a perfect example of that type of person who runs for office because, hey, what else are they going to do? They've got nothing to lose. Why don't they just swing for the fence? And, a lot of people get upset about that. But, really the whole point is that George Santos exemplifies the system. A lot of people on the right get upset about George Santos, but they don't talk about, look at the person who occupies the White House right now, Joe Biden. I mean, this guy lied about, he said he got scholarships in college. He said he got 3 degrees. He said he was at the top of his class. He had to drop out of a previous presidential run, over a plagiarism scandal, the corn pop stories, everything about Ukraine and Hunter. And I mean, everything about this man is a lie. And he's the president of the United States. I mean, look at John Fetterman, for crying out loud. I mean, this guy, people on the right, this is what's just so hilarious to me. You've got Mitch McConnell over there talking about, candidate quality matters. We've got to run better candidates, or, they're not going to be able to win. What about John Fetterman? Okay, this guy suffered a massive stroke in the middle of his Senate campaign. This guy stood up there on the debate stage against Dr. Oz, and he was essentially a cyborg. He had to have things read out to him on closed captioning. The whole thing was an absolute joke, and he wins the election. And of course, promptly upon being sworn into the U.S. Senate, he checks himself into a mental institution. Okay, so everything, and of course, you couldn't say during the campaign that he was mentally handicapped, that he was disabled, that he had physical problems. This guy is mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically wrecked, and he's a United States senator. Okay, this is the system. And Pennsylvania is a so-called purple state. My brother and my sister-in-law, they live in Pennsylvania. You can't win. We're stuck trying to preserve this system that, you would hope that people like George Santos and John Fetterman and Joe Biden would display to people that the system is illegitimate. Why are we fighting for this? Why do we expend so much political capital and time and energy into this system when these are the people who represent us? This is the best that we got. It's ridiculous. We don't have to accept it. But you have to understand, the reason why it's not going to change, rapidly, the reason why the system is not going to reform itself, it has to be some kind of an outside stressor, is because, there is a politics industry, and it's set up to have this, blue team versus red team fake fight that I talked about earlier. That's the way that it works. That's the fundraising apparatus is set up, around that. The way that people understand politics is set up around that. So, you've got to have this fake fight, and they're going to prop it up artificially for as long as they can, because that is in their interest. The incentive structure is set up through that. Okay, so all these politicians, we're all looking to people who are in Congress to start delegitimizing the system. Why would they do that? Their entire self-esteem and self-worth is wrapped up in being a member of Congress, a representative or a U.S. senator. Why would they be incentivized to say this system sucks? There are a few good ones, people like Thomas Massey who, are pretty open about it. But, the other, 400, 500 of them, why would they do that? Why would they kill the golden goose? So, that really, I want to get people thinking about these things differently. And that's why in terms of George Santos, I would love to see him run for president in 2024. Santos 2024. Because why not? I want to see people who will delegitimize the system, who will expose the cracks in it. And that's why I think attacking Santos has been this kind of bipartisan thing, is because, I mean, really the system is propped up by the appearance of legitimacy, right? And as soon as that slips away, that's when things really get dicey. And that really, I think that was that's one of the main reasons why the system itself, right and left, really hated Trump so much, is because Trump really showed the system for what it is. He especially showed the media for who they are. And love the guy or hate the guy, he exposed a lot about the system to a lot of people, and at least opened up the eyes of a significant portion of American society. And so I think a Santos 2024 presidential run, he is old enough, I think that would be brilliant. And I wish Santos wouldn't apologize for the misrepresentations allegedly in his background. He should double and triple down. I mean, what do you expect? Like, our politics has become Jerry Springerized. Okay, people are directly incentivized to just make stuff up because they're not going to get punished for it. They're actually be rewarded for it. So why are people surprised when those are the type of people who the system attracts? Okay, I mean, that's really what politics is. I mean, in many cases now today, it's show business. Donald Trump showed that. George Santos shows that. You have a lot of people in politics who are kind of made for TV, and there's a reason for that. That those are the kinds of things the system rewards, and it's not just in politics. I mean, people, as long as our system rewards people, for identifying with a certain group or a certain minority or a certain identity or sexual orientation, there's, as long as the incentive structure flows in that direction, you're going to have people who come out there and say, yeah, I identify in this group. That's the Rachel Dolezal, the fake black lady. That's the big news this week. Angela Davis, the former terrorist, who, by the way, the Arkansas taxpayers, University of Arkansas, paid $25,000 to speak at the University of Arkansas a couple of years ago. I mean, she's a former FBI's top 10 most wanted terrorist, who facilitated this holdup of a courtroom. Look it up, Angela Davis. And of course, now she's made a very nice living in America as this oppressed black lady and blah blah blah. And then it comes out, there's this story, Know Your Roots, or some kind of a story where they showed her live react to the revealing of her ancestry. And of course, like, she has white people in her ancestry, one of whom was on the Mayflower, and others who were slave owners. So Angela Davis, I mean, she's an oppressor, she's a colonizer. She's a descendant of slave owners. It just the ridiculousness of it all. It's not going to stop, because that's what the system rewards right now. But we've got to fight back against that. And that's really what I want. That's what I want this podcast to be. I want this podcast to be a place where you're going to hear the truth. Okay, you're going to hear it unvarnished. You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it full bore, full frontal. It's not just going to be politics. Today was politics heavy. We'll get into the military. I served in the Army and the infantry for 3.5 years. Went through Ranger School. Should probably do a Ranger School podcast. I want to talk about sports. I want to talk about my experience with the University of Arkansas and the New England Patriots, my experience running for office. But, I want this podcast to be a place where you're going to hear the truth. You're going to hear it in a way that's going to make you think. We're going to get into history. We're going to think about the things that should be thought about that you're just not going to get from, the major networks and from a lot of a lot of podcasts out there, that are just kind of fluff. So, I hope this first episode was interesting. I hope it was stimulating. I really hope that, you'll subscribe and you'll make this a part of your podcast or your streaming repertoire. And, hopefully, you'll be excited about this, and it'll be something that will grow and take off. And we'll see what happens. So, really appreciate you tuning in. And until next time, this is Jake Bequette.